When the Civil War began with the first shots fired on Fort Sumter, the border state of Missouri had already seen its fair share of conflict during the Bleeding Kansas border war between the abolitionist Free Staters of Kansas and the pro-slavery Jayhawkers of Missouri from 1854 to 1861. Now, Missouri is caught in its own state of civil war, as half of its population supports secession in the South while the other half supports the Union. Missouri had been admitted into the Union in 1820 as a slave state in accordance with the Missouri Compromise, with the state's heavy pro-slavery population sympathetic to the Confederate cause. President Lincoln makes the objective of securing control over the border state of Missouri a top priority for the Union Army. On April 20th, 1861, a large company of secessionists from Clay County in the Missouri State Militia, led by Colonel Henry Lewis Root, and a Jackson County militia company captained by John H. Murray of Independence, about 200 men in all, forced their way into the Liberty Arsenal, seizing armaments and munitions from the Federal Supply Depot. This leaves the St. Louis Arsenal as the only other federal installation in the entire state. Soon, Union Army Captain Nathaniel Lyon, an ardent abolitionist with a fiery determination to keep Missouri in the Union, begins raising federal regiments of volunteers, consisting mainly of pro-Union German immigrants for 3 months' service. The next major incident in Missouri occurs on May 10, 1861, in the city of St. Louis. That morning, Captain Lyon marches into the city with his regiments to capture a garrison of secessionists from the Missouri State Militia being raised at a drill field known as Camp Jackson. The Federals captured the secessionists and marched them through the city, putting them under guard outside St. Louis Arsenal. The militiamen are paroled under the agreement to not take up further arms against the Union. However, an angry mob of civilians begin swarming around the German volunteers, shouting ethnic slurs and throwing rocks at the troops. Things escalate out of control when Captain Lyon is knocked unconscious by a buck from his horse and the German troops become nervous. When someone in the angry mob fires a pistol, the Union soldiers fire into the crowd. The Camp Jackson Affair, or Camp Jackson Massacre, as it is called in outraged Southern newspapers, leaves 28 civilians dead, including 2 teenage children and an infant still in its mother's arms. Lyon pushes on, leaving the dead and wounded behind as riots break out in St. Louis the next day. In response to the Camp Jackson Affair, the Missouri General Assembly authorizes the formation of the Missouri State Guard, a militia army led by Governor Claiborne Fox Jackson and Brigadier General Sterling Price. Its purpose is to protect Missouri from invasion. However, its ranks draw heavily from the region in northern Missouri dubbed Little Dixie for its strong pro-Southern sentiments. By mid-May, divisions of Missouri State Guardsmen are organizing across the state. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Lyon is promoted to Brigadier General and placed in command of all federal forces in the state of Missouri. On June 11th, General Lyon meets with Governor Jackson and General Price to resolve the disagreements peacefully. However, the talks soon turn into arguments, with Lyon angrily threatening Price and Jackson. Ultimately, the talks lead to the collapse of the Price-Harney truce that held up for a month. Price and Governor Jackson flee for Jefferson City, and the next day, the governor calls for 50,000 volunteers to defend Missouri from the Union Army. Thousands of additional men soon answer the proclamation and enlist in their local districts and divisions of the state, greatly bolstering the Missouri State Guard's numbers. Wasting no time, Lyon splits his Army of the West and sends a column under Colonel Franz Sigel, a prominent German-American officer, to Rolla in order to secure the rail and telegraph lines. Meanwhile, the remainder of Lyon's army travels up the Missouri River by steamboat, a first in the Civil War. 4 days later, Lyon's troops occupy the state capital and he installs a new pro-Union governor. But exiled Governor Jackson has escaped upriver with some 400 state guardsmen to the fairgrounds outside Boonville. Here, the two armies will engage in their first battle. But Sterling Price has fallen ill and the inexperienced Governor Jackson takes command. The First Battle of Boonville on June 17th ends in a disaster for the Missouri State Guard. General Lyon's well-drilled artillerists quickly send the State Guardsmen into a panic retreat in what will be dubbed the Boonville Races by Northern press. Jackson's Missouri State Guard forces flee south towards Lamar, merging along the way with 2 more divisions from Lexington. Price, having regained his strength, rides further south in the hopes of finding aid from the only people he knows can provide it, the Confederates. In just 30 days, Lyon's aggressive actions have secured Union control over Missouri's rivers and railroads, and he has cut off Price's army from northern Missouri and Little Dixie. Lyon has also effectively scattered the rebellious elements of the Missouri State Legislature, but the general is not content. He wants to destroy this army that has dared to defy him, and ambitious Colonel Franz Sigel is all too willing to oblige. Having already seized Rolla and Springfield, Sigel moves west, hoping to cut off the Missouri State Guard's retreat. But thanks to their early rendezvous with Price, the Missouri State Guard now outnumbers Sigel 4-1. At the Battle of Carthage, or Battle of Dry Fork on July 5th, Sigel is forced into an embarrassing retreat east to Springfield, where his army merges with Lyon's advancing column a week later. The Missouri State Guard continues south to Cowskin Prairie, where Price begins to mold them into a well-trained, well-disciplined army. Meanwhile, in the northern region of Arkansas, 5,000 troops of the Confederate Army under Brigadier General Benjamin McCulloch encamped just a few miles from Price's Missourians across the border. A former Texas Ranger, McCulloch doubts the fighting spirit and abilities of Price and his ragtag Missouri State Guardsmen, but a Confederate Missouri is enticing. The rivers and rails can open new supply lines. It offers a greater control over the future Oklahoma Territory and possibly even Kansas. It also provides a wall of defense for the state of Arkansas. At Cassville on July 29th, McCulloch successfully merges with Price's army, and together with the Arkansans of Brigadier General Nicholas B. Pierce, they form the Western Army, 12,000 strong. But Lyon has his own band of dedicated fighters, with more coming as he marches to Springfield to meet Sigel. At the core of his army is 600 professional soldiers, led by West Point officers known as regulars. They don't count on the volunteers to fight when the shooting starts, but many in Lyon's 2 Kansas volunteer regiments have seen plenty of combat in the 1850s border war of Bleeding Kansas. However, by midsummer, the 3-month enlistment periods of Lyon's troops were nearing an end. The men could go home and rightfully say they did their duty, and many did. Lyon's Army of the West shrinks to less than 6,000 men. Those who stay soon wonder if they made the right choice. In his trek through Missouri to find Pierce and the Missouri State Guard, Lyon's men cover more ground that summer than most armies do in the entire war. In one 30-hour span, they march 50 miles, going without sleep, marching along dusty roads with few trees to give relief from the scorching sun. When they aren't on the march, they encamp at Springfield, a city whose people are staunchly pro-Union. July passes into August without any major action, and for the first time, those close to Lyon see something in him they had never seen before: doubt. The latest intelligence relayed by telegraph, another first in warfare, suggests that he is badly outnumbered. He had recently been demoted as Union commander in Missouri, replaced by politically connected and popular Brigadier General John C. Fremont, who now wants some of Lyon's regulars for the fight in the East. And with the embarrassing Union defeat at the Battle of Bull Run in Virginia, the pressure for a decisive victory is weighed upon Lyon. Meanwhile, the Confederate Western Army has learned to adapt to the conditions where supply lines are few and far between. They live off the land and march on their stomachs, and it is 12,000 empty bellies that lead them into a valley 10 miles southwest of Springfield. Crops and livestock are plentiful: corn, oats, wheat, sweet potatoes, just to name a few. There are 250 hogs here and 100 head of cattle. A meandering water source also provides relief for the men and animals during this dry, hot August. But for the people living around Wilson's Creek, the land and their lives will never be the same. John and Roxana Ray's farm has 440 acres in the valley surrounding Wilson's Creek. Those slaveholders, like many in southwestern Missouri, the Rays are decidedly pro-Union, and, as the area's U.S. postmaster, John Ray's farm straddles the Wire Road, a major highway across southwest Missouri. Down the road, Joseph Sharp is living a nightmare. He is one of the wealthiest farmers in the area, with 1,000 acres of farmland and 3 slaves to work it. Now he and his fellow farmers have become unwillingly host to 12,000 rebels and militiamen. Many Southerners worry that this peaceful valley will lull the Confederates and Missouri State Guardsmen into complacency and seal their doom. General Lyon knows that he is outnumbered at least 2-1 and believes an attack on Springfield is only a matter of time. He begins sending requests to General Fremont for reinforcements, and though he has 50,000 fresh soldiers at his command, Fremont sends none. It becomes increasingly clear that if Lyon does not pull back to his supply base in Rolla, he risks his whole army of the West. Lyon fears retreating. The Southerners' large mounted force could surround or cut off his long lines of men on foot, and abandoning the region's pro-Union civilians to the Confederates doesn't sit well with him. Also, leaving without a fight doesn't suit the general's character. Franz Sigel, eager to prove himself and his Germans, comes up with a solution. He proposes dividing Lyon's outnumbered army and attacking the southern force from 2 directions. The armies would march at night and launch a surprise attack at dawn on Saturday, August 10th, leaving their opponent reeling and hopefully buying time to safely move to Rolla. The plan would be brilliant if successful, but disastrous if it fails. Coincidentally, McCulloch and Price have given orders for their army to attack Lyon on the same day, but heavy rainstorms interfered. Unlike Lyon's men, most of the Southerners lack cartridge boxes for their paper-wrapped ammunition. The march is postponed to keep the gunpowder dry, but in a crucial oversight, Price and McCulloch do not post sentries along the camp's edge. If a surprise attack comes, they will have little warning. As Southerners sleep, Northerners march. In the early morning hours of August 10, 1861, the stage is set for the Civil War's first major battle at the Trans-Mississippi Theater. Throughout the pre-dawn hours of Saturday, August 10, 1861, the Federal columns under Brigadier General Nathaniel Lyon continued their march towards the Confederate and Missouri State Guard camps. Surprise is essential to the Union attack plan. At dawn, Federal 6- and 12-pounder howitzers from Captain James Totham's Company F, 2nd U.S. Artillery, situated north of a rise known as Oak Hill, opened fire on the rebel camp. This was the opening barrage of the battle. Further to the south, Colonel Franz Sigel deploys his 2nd Brigade's 1,200 men onto a ridge overlooking the Sharp farm. Upon hearing the opening barrage of Lyon's attack north of Oak Hill, Sigel orders Backoff's battery of Missouri Light Artillery, commanded by Lieutenant Edward Schetzenbach, to open fire on the 1,800 Southerners camped on the Sharp farm. The opening barrage of Backoff's battery rattles the sleeping Southerners, who quickly flee from the area. With the rebels cleared from their camp, Sigel proceeds to move his 2nd Brigade off the ridge and into the Sharp stubble field. When about 800 Southerners attempt to make a stand, Sigel's artillerymen open fire again, and after about 30 minutes, the Southerners withdraw. Back beyond Oak Hill, Brigadier General Lyon's 3 other brigades are beginning a drive to capture the hill. Colonel James Cawthorn's Cavalry Brigade from Brigadier General James S. Raines' 2nd Division of the Missouri State Guard, which is headquartered around Gibson's Mill, receives the brunt of the Federal attack. At about 5:30 a.m., Colonel DeWitt C. Hunter and his 300 Missouri State Guard cavalrymen form a line of battle on the unnamed northern spur of Oak Hill in order to oppose Lyon's advance. Hunter's outnumbered guardsmen are quickly driven off, and Lyon pushes his brigades onto the crest of Oak Hill. The fighting will become so intense on Oak Hill that it will receive a new nickname, Bloody Hill. When a Missouri State Guard runner arrives at Brigadier General Benjamin McCulloch's headquarters located on the property of the Wynn Farm, around 5:45 a.m., the exhausted runner frantically informs the general that Union forces have driven Cawthorn's brigade from their camp. General McCulloch, who is in the midst of eating breakfast when the runner arrives, calmly replies that he will inspect the field after he's finished eating. McCulloch initially does not believe the report from Cawthorn's messenger due to a cry wolf effect. Weeks earlier, Cawthorn and his nervous cavalrymen had fired into the woods near their camp when they believed they had heard Federals nearing, only to find they had been spooked by nearby deer. There's another reason why McCulloch initially doesn't believe the report. The general's headquarters is situated in an acoustic shadow, meaning that the sound reverberates differently from this position, and he is unable to hear the opening barrage when it is fired. It is only after a second messenger arrives and confirms the first report that Brigadier General McCulloch springs into action, riding to Edwards' cabin where Brigadier General Sterling Price is headquartered to confer with his Missouri State Guard counterpart. Generals McCulloch and Price soon formulate a plan to counter the Federal attacks to the north and south. The two generals' quick response to the Union attack will help them reorganize the routed Southerners retreating from their camps for an efficient counterattack. Meanwhile, Brigadier General Lyon's 3 brigades have been forming into line of battle on the crest of Bloody Hill. Totham's battery is also unlimbered and firing down into the Southern camps to the south. As the Southerners retreat and rally on Brigadier General McCulloch, one Arkansas battery of 6-pounder smoothbore howitzers, the Pulaski Light Artillery, unlimbers to the east of Wilson's Creek near the Wynn House, where they distract Totham's guns with heavy counter-battery fire. The fire from the Pulaski Light Artillery keeps the Federal advance from Bloody Hill in check. This also helps buy time for General Price's infantry to form a line of battle on the southern slope of the hill. The first Southern counterattack on Bloody Hill begins at approximately 6:30 a.m. Brigadier General McBride's 7th Division of Missouri State Guardsmen forms its line of battle and charges uphill. Federal troops from Major Samuel D. Sturgis's 1st Brigade and Lieutenant Colonel George L. Andrews' 3rd Brigade are deployed in line of battle on the western part of Bloody Hill. Due to the rough terrain, the 2 lead regiments, the 1st and 2nd Missouri, had become split by a ravine in the hill. When the first Southern attack rushes uphill, the Missourians are unable to lay down an effective volley. Instead, fighting becomes piecemeal on both sides of the ravine. Eventually, however, the Southern counterattack falters and they fall back down the hill. Sturgis reinforces his right flank with the 2nd Kansas, while the regulars from Major Frederick Steele's 2nd U.S. Infantry help bolster the left flank. At about 7:30, a second rebel attack is launched up the hill. This one is equally bloody and marked by close quarters bayonet and hand-to-hand combat. This too, however, is eventually repulsed. Bloody Hill's nickname is becoming evidently clear as bodies pile up on the southern slope of the rise. With Southern reinforcements continued to stream into the fight at Bloody Hill, many of the Federals, Lyon included, were asking the same question: where are Sigel's men? Further south, Colonel Franz Sigel was moving his 2nd Brigade further north when suddenly, at 8 a.m., he halts his advance at the Sharp House. Sigel deploys his troops on either side of the Wire Road and waits. Around 8:30 a.m., a group of gray-clad soldiers moved south down the Wire Road towards Sigel's position. With early reports informing Sigel of the Federal advance on Oak Hill, Sigel assumes that these soldiers are the gray-uniformed Kansas Greyhounds of the 1st Iowa, part of Lyon's force. He is mistaken. They are soldiers of the Confederate 3rd Louisiana Infantry Regiment, supported by Missouri State Guard and Arkansas troops. The Southerners, aided by 2 artillery batteries, pour a deadly fire onto the Union ranks. Sigel's Germans are rattled by the heavy musket fire, and soon men begin streaming off the field. This turns into a complete rout, with Sigel leading the column in full retreat. The defeat of Sigel's 2nd Brigade marks a major turning point in the battle. as the Southerners can now focus all their attention on Lyon's understrength brigades on Bloody Hill. The situation on Bloody Hill is rapidly deteriorating by the minute. Brigadier General Lyon desperately tries to rally his men, but to no avail. Wounded twice already, he has had his horse shot from under him, and he now roams the battlefield. After being encouraged by Major Sturgis to try to rally his men one last time, General Lyon moves to the front lines to inspire the troops. Just then, at 9:30 a.m., a bullet strikes him while he is positioning his troops. His last words are reported as either being, "I am going," as if he is finally allowed to rest, or "I am killed," as if he is surprised to have been fatally shot. Regardless, the Civil War has taken the life of its first general officer killed in combat. After General Lyon is killed, Major Sturgis assumes command of the Union forces. Realizing that the Pulaski Light Artillery is pinning Tottenham's battery, he orders regulars from the 1st U.S. Infantry to cross Wilson's Creek and attack the battery. However, as the regulars are making their way through the Ray Farm cornfield, they are engaged by Confederates of the 3rd Louisiana and 3rd Arkansas Infantry Battalion, having just arrived from the south. Bloody combat ensues from 10 to 10:30 in the Ray cornfield, with the Confederates laying down devastating volleys from the split rail fence beyond the corn. The regulars are sitting ducks as they are picked off by rebel volleys. Eventually, the Federals retreat back across Wilson's Creek. At 10:30, the Confederates and Missouri State Guardsmen under Generals Price and McCulloch rally for one final assault of Bloody Hill. The Confederates and Missouri State Guard troops give off a screeching rebel yell, one of the first of the Civil War, and storm up the slopes of the hill, smashing into what was left of the Federal lines. The Southerners clash with the Federals in brutal, bloody melee combat. Finally, realizing their position is lost, Major Sturgis orders a retreat. By 11 a.m., the Southerners have captured Bloody Hill at long last. The shattered Union forces from the Army of the West begin a general retreat toward Springfield. The Battle of Wilson's Creek, also known as Battle of Oak Hills, is finally over. The Union defeat is so devastating that northern newspapers soon dub it the Bull Run of the West. The sun has not yet fully reached its peak, and already the second major battle of the Civil War has ended in a decisive Confederate and Missouri State Guard victory.